What's the connection between scapegoating dynamics in families and sibling estrangement? That's what I'll be talking about in today's episode of Beyond Family Scapegoating Abuse, so stick around. Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Rebecca Mandeville, licensed psychotherapist, certified clinical trauma specialist, and the author of Rejected, Shamed, and Blamed, Help and Hope for Adults in the Family Scapegoat Role. And I'm also a family systems and family scapegoating expert. I want to give a quick shout out to our new channel members. I have one level right now. It's the supporter level. And your support for just $1.99 a month allows me to tackle topics that don't often get talked about on YouTube because they're not always algorithm friendly. And I really appreciate your considering supporting this educational channel. I want to begin this video by revisiting some content that I shared in a two-part video on splitting, which I did quite a while ago, and I'm not sure that many of you have yet seen. In those videos, I get a bit more transpersonal, which is one of my overriding orientations as a clinician, meaning I do believe there's realities beyond the egoic reality. The school that I was trained at acknowledged spiritual states, spiritual psychology, energy, and I like to incorporate that in my work, and I'd like to bring a little bit more of that into my sharings here on YouTube. I'd like you to consider your family of origin as energetic ground. You could think of this as an energetic matrix of sorts that you pop out of the womb and you're taken out of the hospital into this energetic matrix. If you are growing up in a healthy, functioning family system, which we would call an open family system, where new information can get in and members of the family are reasonably healthy, the relationships in the family are reasonably good and non-conflictual, you're walking on solid, stable family ground. But for those of us born into dysfunctional, highly dysfunctional family systems, which could include narcissistic family system dynamics, it could be an alcoholic family system, families very much affected by one or more family members having addictions, et cetera, et cetera. These would be family systems that are closed family systems. It's difficult for new information to get in. And the energetic ground is not stable, not solid. It's split. Think of it as an earthquake. The ground's often shaking and it's hard to walk. If you try to walk on that ground, you can fall into a crack that's opened up, into a fissure. You never know when you're going to fall into one of those cracks. And that's why many of you, I'm sure, have said to yourself or out loud, it's like I grew up in a war zone, or it's like I grew up in a battlefield. That is because you're born into this splitness, this energetically split family ground. There's no safety. There's no security. You never know when you're going to fall into a crack, a fissure, a hole. And this can be, needless to say, very anxiety provoking. It's why so many people from dysfunctional family systems experience anxiety. If there are various types of violence, aggressiveness, mistreatment, maltreatment, abuse, then there's a good chance children growing up in these types of family environments will come out the other end with complex trauma symptoms. And indeed, via my original research on what I ended up naming family scapegoating abuse, or FSA, complex trauma symptoms were prevalent in so many of the respondents. And that's why I focused on that in my book, Rejected, Shamed, and Blamed. I have a couple of chapters in the book going into detail on complex trauma, on betrayal trauma, and on how betrayal trauma, toxic or traumatic shame, complex trauma all relates with and connects with family scapegoating abuse. And that's why so many of you may be struggling with anxiety, complex trauma symptoms. It's this split, unstable, uncertain family ground that you grew up in, where there's no sense of consistent nurturing, no sense of consistent safety. So if you have siblings, you grew up in this shaky, split energetic ground. You grew up in this closed family system, possibly impacted by generations of intergenerational trauma. Some people are calling it now ancestral trauma. There's not a high likelihood that you and your siblings were getting good parental modeling. You likely weren't having healthy communication modeled. You probably weren't seeing healthy conflict resolution going on around you. You were probably growing up in a family where there were certain people in the family who had a great deal of power, including in the sibling subsystem, siblings that were favored by a parent. This would be called the golden child, a sibling who had a great amount of power in the family system, which might have increased as they got older. And there may have been the scapegoat child. The scapegoat child, in my research and in my clinical opinion, is the child that's actually bearing the intergenerational trauma, the trauma that is not recognized and has not been addressed within that family of origin. It gets projected onto that child, and the child becomes the scapegoat child. So verses in the Bible where the scapegoat is bearing the sins of the tribe, I like to say, and I say it in my book, the scapegoat child is bearing, in my opinion, the trauma that the family has not processed. Energetically split family ground is going to lead to splits between the family members. And this is why families that have a lot of splitting systemically and have maybe personality disordered parents in that family system, and personality disorders are actually in some sense intrapsychic splitting. With all this splitting going on, it's rare that the siblings are all going to have good relationships with each other. In the cases of severe splitting, where there is a golden child and a scapegoat child, this is a recipe for disaster within the sibling subsystem. There's going to be rifts and possible estrangement, often between the favored golden child and the scapegoat child. And if there's other siblings in that sibling subsystem, they're going to be caught in that rift, and they'll have different ways of handling that. A lot of you may hear from siblings, they don't want to take sides. If you're in a rift with another sibling or estranged, they don't want to get involved, or you're both stubborn. Neither of you will apologize to each other, implying that you should apologize to someone who's perhaps been bullying you, scapegoating you, things they learned from your parents to keep you in that scapegoat role. Often, what your siblings have learned from your parents is the scapegoat narrative. And the scapegoat narrative is a term I created during the course of my research to describe the story that the parents, or the whole family system has about you. The story usually has no basis in reality. It often can be the opposite of what is true. The story is usually defamatory in nature, whether overtly or covertly. Um, it might include things like you're emotionally unstable, mentally ill, a liar, a thief, a drug user. I mean, sometimes the scapegoat narrative, the story is so over the top, it's almost laughable, but it's of course it's not funny. I've had clients from all walks of life with all kinds of degrees and licenses who are very respected in their communities, very respected within their jobs, have these types of scapegoat narratives attached to them. And they, before they come to me, they do not understand how such distorted realities and distorted narratives could be attached to them. But once you understand what fuels scapegoating dynamics and how various family members are are machinating to control and to maintain power within the family system, it gets more understandable. So if you're one of those FSA adult survivors who had the great shock of hearing the scapegoat narrative coming out of a sibling's mouth, you're in the right place because it is something that happens to many FSA adult survivors, as verified by my original family systems research on FSA. And this often will occur even with a sibling you might have felt close to at one time. When the scapegoating parent or parents, if both parents scapegoated you, becomes infirm, such as dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, or dies, suddenly one of your siblings or more than one of your siblings, and particularly the golden child sibling, has the same story about you. And they won't have any problem letting you know that they see you in that distorted way. Now, why might this be? Well, to understand why your sibling has adopted the scapegoat narrative, even a sibling that you thought you were great friends with, you need to understand family systems and family homeostasis. Homeostasis means balance, and systems are always trying to find a balance, even if that balance is not a healthy one. So, in a family that has a lot of splitting, is split in that energetic family ground, there's going to be an unhealthy homeostasis. That homeostasis requires everyone to stay in their roles. That homeostasis requires there be someone in power in the family who, after a parent's death, needs to be a lot like that dead parent. So this often is not a conscious process, but when a parent dies, especially if they were the power holding parent or a narcissistic parent, then the most favored, most empowered sibling, who may or may not have narcissism themselves, will take on that parental role, will take on the stories of the parent, including the story that the parent had about you. And bingo, you are now saddled with the scapegoat narrative yet again. I know there's many of you who might have thought that when a scapegoating parent died, you would be released. You would be freed of that scapegoat narrative that you've been saddled with and that has harmed you and has isolated you and caused you so much pain. Probably included in that pain is complex trauma symptoms. And then to your horror, discover that a sibling has now taken over that narrative, that same narrative, and you're not freed from it at all. It's extraordinarily disheartening, to say the least. It can be soul crushing, literally soul crushing. There's no escape. You're back in that same role once again from your childhood. You can't escape it. You can't get away from these distorted narratives, from the lies about you, from the defamatory statements that some in your family have no problem sharing to anyone who will listen, including extended family members. There's this idea out there that scapegoating only happens when no one's around. And I did a poll on this last year. I already knew from my research this wasn't true, but you all let me know. Yeah, I think it was 38 or 42% of you said that you've been scapegoated, had these distorted narratives played out in front of other people. Right there. I think that's an important point to make clear, because we want this to be reflective of the reality of adult survivors. And a lot of you here, my subscribers, have written me to say, oh, my parent was saying all this crap about me with other people right there in the room. They were saying it to them while I was in the room, or saying it on the telephone to them while I was in the room. The point being, the scapegoat narrative is part of the family scapegoating abuse. It's part of the FSA package. I've done enough research to know that it does not always happen when there's nobody around, this form of abuse. So is it any wonder in families with this split energetic ground that a scapegoated adult child, an FSA adult survivor, who's having, either through the parents or via siblings who are now perpetuating the behaviors that constitute family scapegoating abuse, as I describe in my book, and on a video here, 16 signs of family scapegoating. There's way more than 16. That's what I focused on in that video. 16 signs of family scapegoating abuse. Is it any wonder that there's going to be sibling estrangements in families such as these? How long is the scapegoated child, the scapegoated adult child, expected to live with these scapegoating behaviors? If a sibling that is scapegoating you is not willing to acknowledge that they might be perpetuating the scapegoating behaviors of a parent that were so harmful to you, that did damage to you, if they aren't willing to look at that, if they aren't willing to be open to ideas that we know about in family systems of how these types of families can project onto a particular child all of the family's unfinished business and, as I call it, emotional schmoo. If they aren't willing to look at that, how is the FSA adult survivor supposed to remain connected to their family members, including to a sibling, one or more siblings that are perpetuating and carrying on the scapegoat narrative? You know, when you were all children, it's understandable that siblings may not have stuck up for you, may have taken sides, may have aligned with a scapegoating parent because they were just trying to survive just like you. But when you become adults, there's more accountability, there's more responsibility. And if it's clear that you have been ostracized, that you have been bad mouth, for want of a better term, that you have been spoken about in negative, hostile ways. And if people don't want to look at that as adults, and if people aren't curious about what might be contributing to you being in this scapegoat role, and look at the fact that you are in the scapegoat role, well, silence is complicity. Saying you don't want to take sides, in a way, is just another way of remaining silent. As adults, siblings may be scared of a dominant sibling. You may have a narcissistic sibling who is very empowered in the family system, has taken on a patriarchal or matriarchal role, who is a bully or aggressive in their mannerisms, and your adult siblings may be afraid of them. And you're kind of thrown to the wolves and left out on a limb under the guise of, I don't want to take sides, versus them being honest and saying, I'm afraid of our brother, or I'm afraid of our sister. I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to deal with it. That's more honest. So I like to challenge anyone who says, I don't want to take sides. What are they really saying? Are they saying they're aware of how a particular family member's been scapegoated and they don't want to deal with it? Are they afraid? What are they really saying when they're saying they don't want to take sides? That might be a question you ask one of these more neutral family members when they tell you that they don't want to get involved. Or they might even say, why don't you go apologize? They never will. I just want the family to be like it used to be, or I want us to have good connections now that we're adults. I want to do things as a family. In a way, they're asking you to just pretend none of this ever happened. And, when you're scapegoated and you're walking around with complex trauma and anxiety and feeling isolated and alone, it's hard to pretend it never happened, isn't it? I'm publishing an article on my blog tomorrow about family scapegoating abuse and sibling estrangement. And so you may want to check that out. You can also subscribe to my newsletter. And you can access that article the day after this video is released by going to scapegoatrecovery.com/blog. And I hope that you have gotten something out of today's video, where I go a little deeper into family systems terms, like homeostasis, because, to know what we're trying to heal, we need to understand the wound and where it came from. And that was the point of my introductory book on FSA. And that is why I'm here offering free education on YouTube. And again, if you appreciate what I'm doing here, consider becoming a member and supporting this channel. But regardless, I'm so glad that you're here today. And I love hearing from you in the comments. And it means a lot to me that you care and take the time to write to me. And I'll look forward to being back with a new video soon. Take care.